Philosophers have been discussing ethics for thousands of years, and there are numerous amounts of different ethical theories. But are any of these ethical theories objectively bad? If so, how are we to tell? In other words, how do we evaluate different theories? Hey guys, this is me from the future. I realized some faults within the first recording, so I decided to re-record some sections of it. So if you notice me changing shirts from time to time, that is why. Hope it's not too distracting, so let's start. In this episode, I will highlight 8 different standards through which we can evaluate any normative theory. Satisfying them all is probably impossible, but the more it does, simply, the better it is. And some of these standards are more important than others, I would say. Which is more important? I'll leave that for you to decide. In this book, written by Mark Timmons, we can find these 8 standards that we can use whenever we want to evaluate an ethical theory. I would also like to add that sometimes the satisfaction is a matter of degree. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a clear binary answer to these. Some theories might have a good satisfaction rate, and some might only have an adequate satisfaction rate. Alright, 1. Consistency. Let's say that we have a moral theory that tells us that a certain action, together with all the relevant facts, is both morally right and wrong at the same time. If that is the case, wouldn't we say that there is something wrong with this theory? A moral theory should always be consistent and never contradict itself, both in theory and in practice. An important aim of a moral theory is to guide one's actions, and if I'm in a certain scenario and a theory yields inconsistent verdicts, it is unable to guide me, right? Number 2, determinacy. A good theory should always be a strong guide through life in any situation and determine what actions one should take. If I find myself at a moral crossroad and I am at the same time a strong believer in a specific moral theory, but still don't know how to act in a certain situation, then the theory in question is too vague in some sense, right? It is like having a compass that only swirls around and doesn't really direct me where to go. That theory then fails to satisfy the standard of determinacy. If a theory can't tell me how to act in any given situation, it's a bad theory, right? 3. Applicability. Simply put, how easily can we apply a specific theory into practice? For instance, utilitarianism thinks that we should maximize the amount of utility in the world. So it is both somewhat consistent and determinate, but very hard to apply in practice because of the limits of human knowledge. How would I ever know that this or that action would maximize utility? Here is an absurd example. Let's say that I ran into a burning building to save a child, and I succeeded. A good action indeed, right? Or is it? Because then that same child later became a dictator, killing millions of people. So my action of saving the child led to mass murder. The problem here is that, in a way, we're clueless of what consequences our actions will lead to. So utilitarianism is an example of a theory that is very hard to apply in practice. But there are ways for utilitarians to solve this issue, which I will discuss in a future episode. Number 4, intuitive appeal. We all have an intuitive belief of what morality should be about. This is somewhat vague, but we all have some deep-rooted belief that morality should be, for instance, impartial, concerned in some way with the well-being of persons, grounded in human nature, etc. If one wants to come up with a theory, for an example, one should at least consider what morality commonly is about. Then we have number 5, internal support. There are numerous ethical cases in which people, and indeed philosophers, disagree with each other. Should euthanasia be legal? Should we treat animals the same way as we treat humans? Then we have the case with abortion, drugs, etc., etc. But in contrast with these ethical disputes, there seems to be things in which almost all of us would agree with. Take this sentence. A. Torturing innocent people is wrong. Probably every sane person would agree with A. Hence, a moral theory should yield the moral verdict that agrees with A. Otherwise, the theory in question is in conflict with our internal moral beliefs. If a theory implies that it is morally okay to torture innocent people, we should at least be a little bit suspicious of that theory, right? In other words, it lacks internal support. Then we have explanatory power. It is not enough for a theory to only guide me through life. It has to be able to explain why certain actions are good and others bad. In other words, what is it that makes an action good or bad? If a moral doctrine only tells me what to do, but not why I should do it, there is something wrong with that theory. Utilitarianism is a good example of having good explanatory power. If we ask why torturing innocent people is wrong, a utilitarian would simply reply with, well, because it would decrease the happiness in the world, duh. A good and simple explanation, right? Then we have 7. External support. A moral theory does not reside within a vacuum. We should consider the implications from other fields of study when we theorize about morality. For instance, the field of anthropology shows us that people have very different views on morality, not only depending on where they live, but also depending in what time period. Morality here in Sweden is very different compared with China. And morality in Sweden today is very different from morality in Sweden in the 1500s. So it seems that morality is relative, at least according to anthropology. So the ethical theory of moral relativism receives strong external support from the non-moral discipline of anthropology. So theories can have or lack support from other disciplines outside and indeed from inside of philosophy. Then lastly we have 8. Publicity. This is simply asking the question, what would happen if everybody was taught a specific theory and then began to practice it? For instance, what would the world look like if everybody was taught, let's say, ethical egoism, for an example? Simply put, ethical egoism says that everyone ought to act within their self-interests at all times. What a good theory, huh? Now, what would the world look like if everybody followed ethical egoism? Not a good place indeed. And actually, it is not a good place even seen from an egoistic standpoint either, because of the prisoner's dilemma, which I unfortunately don't have time to go through in this episode. But oh well. Oh well. So there you have all the different standards. Don't worry if some of them aren't that clear. I will come back to these constantly throughout the next part of this series, where we will go through real ethical theories. Also, did I miss anything? Is there something else here that we should add into our system of evaluation? Please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Perfect. Now we are ready to tackle real moral theories. And if you want to know more about ethics in general, then do check out this video here.